like to call this first regular joint quarterly meeting of the Board of Directors, Colorado River Conservation, Water Conservation District of the Colorado River. To order.
First of the year. Some people just say river district.
I thought I might, but then all of a sudden I thought I should be very informed. But anyway, welcome to this meeting.
If we could go ahead and have a roll call, Stephanie, I appreciate it.
Alden Vandenbrink,
Present.
Terry Dennison,
Present.
Nancy Jacober,
Here.
Gary Martinez,
Here.
Kathy Chandler Henry, Mark Catlin,
Here.
Mark Rober,
Here.
Mike Richard,
Here.
Ruby Hazard, Scott McGinnis.
Here.
Selena Chavez. Here. Julia Macy. Here. Stan Winery. Steve Beckley.
Here.
And then Tom Gray.
Here. Okay, Mr. President, I'm just gonna go ahead to item number 2, which is presentation and report of directors' credentials. I want to report that Mesa, Moffett, and Routt County have sent in their proper credentials. And we have those directors both from Mesa and Routt returning. Unfortunately, Pickton County and Saguache County are waiting on some documents. The benefit is that both our Pickton County and our Saguache County members continue to serve until their replacement or they have been reappointed. So you don't get out of the meeting, you get to continue to participate. Thank you for being here. I would just point out that Routt County, we now have Sonia Macy's commissioner from Routt County here, and I think it'd be appropriate, or as we've done traditionally, to allow the new commissioner or director to introduce herself, and then we could go around the table so that she knows who she's dealing with.
Starting with me.
Welcome.
All right. Well, thank you. Sonia Macy's, I'm a Routt County Commissioner. I am now celebrating 20 years in Routt County, 15 years in elected service. I do have a background in water issues, and know some of the folks around this table from that. I'm a Stevens Springs City Council. I was on the water team for about 8 years with the city, and then also on and off on the Yampa White Green Basin Roundtable. Most recently, prior to becoming a commissioner, I worked at the Division of Water Resources Division 6 office with Aaron Light. We had the distinct pleasure of looking at some of the public-facing issues related to overappropriation, measurement rules, and of course, the abandonment process, which was my first task at the division. And that was quite an interesting opportunity. So I'm pleased to be here. I've been watching the district's meetings for a long time and participated in the campaign to make sure that Routt County was participating financially in the district some time ago. And of course, I need to make sure to pass along our biggest thanks to Doug Monger for representing us for all of these years. And if Doug's with us today, but if you are, Doug, thank you.
Mr. Rober. Well, I'm Mark Rober from Delta County. Been on this board for 4 years. And prior to that, I was a commissioner for 8 years. So rancher by trade, so lifelong commitment to water.
Well, Sonia or Director Macy, excuse me, Macy's. It's good to see you again and be with you on another board. So, Alden Vandenbrink, as you know, with Rio Blanco County, for their representative. I'm the present district manager for the Rio Blanco Water Conservancy District, and that's based out of Rangeley. Water professional for 35 years. I kind of lost count. Since I was a little kid, I jumped into this. So, and just made it my life. So I look forward to sharing this board with you. And I've been around here now for not quite 12 years. So been at it for a while. It's been interesting.
Yeah, welcome on board. You got big shoes to fill with Doug, but you'll fill them. He was fantastic. So Scott, Plymouth Mesa County.
Steve Beckley, Garfield County.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Sonia, Tom Gray, Moffett County. Good to have you here to represent Northwest Colorado.
Pete Fleming, General Counsel.
Welcome, Sonia. I'm Mike Richard I represent Grand County.
Well, my name is Mark Catlin. I'm from Montrose.
been around the River District for quite a few years now. I guess I've been in the water business since I was about first born, because they gave me a shovel for one of my birthday presents. But anyway, welcome to.
Andy Mueller, General Manager.
Gary Martinez, Martinez. Let me have some more coffee. Summit County man.
Reset.
Reset.
It's the corner of that hotel where we're staying.
Gary Martinez, I'm the Summit County rep. I just was reappointed to the board this past January, so welcome.
Hi, Sonia. Francie Jacober, Picken County Commissioner, and my family's integrally involved with water we are producing.
Welcome. We're glad to have you on board. Deputy Henry, Eagle County Past Commissioner, and I also was reappointed last January. This is my 10th year, starting my 10th year.
Sonia, welcome to the board. Carrie Dennison, Uray County. Starting my third year.
I'm also a Sonia. I've been born and raised in Colorado. I grew up on a multi-generational ranch and family in southern Colorado and have made water my life. I'm a limnologist by training, and I also, in my day job, serve as the general manager of the Upper Gunnison River District, and I represent Madison County.
Hi, Sonia. I think we have to
I'm Raby Hazard. I'm represent Saguache County. I've been on the board several years. I'm also on the Upper Gunnison, and I have a CAP operation. Welcome.
Excellent. Well, thank you, everybody, and welcome on board. Our staff, I think if you don't mind, we'll skip the individual introductions right now, but please make a point of getting to know staff if you can get to know Director Macy's and vice versa. One of the advantages to having two-day meetings is we get to have meals together. So hopefully we'll be able to meet some of our folks. Mr. President, I turn to you, or maybe perhaps the Vice President, to run the elections for the nominations for the President.
Thank you. At this time, I'll open nominations for president for 2026.
I nominate Director Mark Catlin as president. I'll second.
Thank you. Director Jacober, you got a motion and a second. Any other nominations? If not, I would ask for a motion to close the nominations.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved by Director Van Brink. And Director Chavez. All in favor of voting Director Catlin as our president, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations.
Well, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Now, I'll make nominations. I'd like to open the floor for nominations for Vice President. Mr. Albrecht.
Nominate Commissioner.
Contagious.
Director Richard from Grant County as vice chair.
Sorry, and a second by Tom Gray. Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, nominations are closed. All of those in favor of Mr. Richard signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Unanimous. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. The appointment for committees is the next item on the agenda. The executive committee, I think, as members will remember, is a rotating committee. Has the president and vice president appointed, and then the counties rotate through subsets of those. This year, the members will be the members from Delta, Mesa, Gunnison, Summit, and Routt County. That's our executive committee. Somewhere going around the table is a chart with my red ink on it where we're making suggestions for the committees. Hopefully there are no objections to that. Those of you who did actually respond to Stephanie's email and indicate what committees we're interested in were put on those committees. Those who didn't respond are being put on committees that we need people on. So, but we'll let you know, at lunch who's on what committee. I just, we have a proposal, but I don't think we need to formalize that yet. That is at the president's discretion, and you all just elected him, so he'll make that decision. Turning to the next item, I'll hand it back to you, Mr. President, the resolution. For how we want to do it.
What we'd like to do is pass a resolution recognizing the service from Director Doug Monger. I'll need a motion.
Second.
Sonia Chavez and Gary well, it came from down there. On that. So, Director Reeby makes a motion, second Carrie Dennison. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed?
And a little pause for Doug.
Yeah.
We'll invite former Director Monger to our July board meeting where we traditionally have a picnic out on the back lawn and have a little presentation for him. So if everybody can try to be here for that meeting, that would be fantastic. Doug served on the board a long time, so.
Yeah, he was an asset. Thanks. Welcome aboard for you.
Consent agenda.
You need a motion to approve the consent agenda? Take a look at it.
Second.
Tom Day, are you getting the?
Well, not,
Let's go
it
ahead.
was a Tom and
Motion by Gray, second by Beckley.
thank you.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? That motion carries. On to the general manager's report.
Or general counsel.
Oh, yeah. I just kind of skip over lawyers.
Yeah. You can have to take the day off.
I'll go with you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would make a recommendation, the board convene into executive session pursuant to CRS section 24-6-402, and 4B and E to discuss the items listed under your agenda tab 7A.
So move Chandler Henry.
Second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. We'll be in executive session.
Thank you. And for the record, I would state that the subject of the discussion in executive session will constitute attorney-client communications for which no further recording needs to be made. Of course.
You want to bring us
Thanks for
out?
being admitted.
I will do that. I'm just going to give Director Dennison the benefit of a couple of moments, to get back in the room. During, Mr. President, are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. During the executive session portion of the River District's board meeting today, the board received attorney communication advice and gave discussion and direction to council regarding the items listed under agenda tab 7A. I would note for the record that Director Dennison recused himself for the discussion of agenda item 7A, Romanet 5. There was one specific action item that we have talked about potentially during the executive session, and I would make a recommendation if the board chooses on that item. Thank you, Mr. President. I would make a recommendation that the board authorize general manager and general counsel to work to execute a contract with BBA Water Consultants, Inc. For work related to the Shoshone project in an amount not to exceed $250,000.
We need a motion.
So
Yes,
moved. Director Chavez.
Second. Chandler Henry.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you. Jason, if you have just a moment to give a brief update on the Richard Dam, it's discussed in your public report.
Yeah, this is page 108 of the public report, 107 going into 108. As you all know, Denver Water appealed the Richard Dam litigation, so that will go to the Colorado Court of Appeals. There was a considerable delay in getting that record certified. Despite a couple of tersely worded orders from the Court of Appeals that they needed to get that done. They finally did. That has been resolved. Denver Water will have until February 11th to file their opening brief, and then our answer brief will be due 35 days from the filing of their opening brief. And then Denver Water's reply will be due 21 days after we file our answer brief. So we are working with our special counsel. Obviously, we haven't seen Denver's opening brief yet, but once we do, we'll start working on our answer.
Thank you. If there's no questions about that, I'd ask Bruce to take up the other action item that's teed up for discussion, which is the special counsel rates.
Thank you, Peter. This being January, we get to spend some time talking about special counsel and their rates. As the directors know, the River District does at times use outside special counsel for a variety of legal matters. And the River District's special counsel policy requires that the board approve all special counsel, including any rate increases for retained special counsel. And along those lines, we have received from a few of our outside counsel new rate sheets and scheduled for 2026. And I will walk through those with you now. At Cart New Hanlon, the rates for James Fosnot, Shoshana Rosenthal, and Rachel Sigmund, counsel that we have retained for assistance with Wolford Dam, our Wolford Reservoir, Richard Dam litigation. Their rates will be increasing from 2025 to 2026 in the amounts of $425 for Mr. Fosnot, $400 for Ms. Rosenthal, and $300 for Sigmund. In addition to counsel at Cart New Hanlon, at times the River District has relied on Carl Coomley of the firm Dietz and Davis for his expertise in a variety of legal matters. Mr. Coomley's rate will increase in 2026 to $400. And lastly, we are also recommending that the board approve a rate increase at an estimated amount of $10,000 for special project work to be performed by the River District specially retained counsel at the law firm Butler Snow. Aside from those three instances, other special counsel have not increased their rates from 2025. We are not seeking any in addition to that, any rate increases for the upcoming year. And lastly, based on the current legal markets and the River District team's research of those rates, we believe the rates as proffered are reasonable. And we therefore recommend that the board approve the 2026 change in rates for the River District's special counsel as just outlined.
So moved. Motion by Dennison,
Second.
second by Ruby Hazard. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed. Motion passes.
Thank you. Mr. President and Board, I have four other items teed up for discussion in your public session, none of which require action. Two of those four items regarding the Water Quality Control Commission's recent adoption of Reg 87 and the report on the federal government's new proposed Waters of the U.S. rule include, are teed up, I think, as well in the general manager's report for discussion, and you have memos that are linked here and elsewhere in the board packet from Rebecca Breesmore. Her and Bruce worked and Jason worked on all of those pretty extensively. But since we are not seeking specific action, I would propose that unless the board has specific questions at this time, that we pass on those, try to catch up on your agenda a little bit, noting that they will be teed up again when Rebecca talks about her memos of that. No?
It's actually teed up in your memo,
Well,
not.
then get going.
Thank you, Peter. I will be brief. Peter will tell you guys that brevity is a strong suit of mine. I'll start with regulation 87. This is discussed in the general counsel's public report, and that's page 6 of the council report. And in that section, there's also a link to Rebecca's memo, which talks about the regulation 87 experience that we just went through, in addition to the new Lotus proposed rule. Starting with regulation 87, as we've discussed a number of times, the General Assembly gave statutory directive to the Water Quality Control Commission to perform rulemaking for a new state dredge and fill program, and to have that rulemaking be completed before December 31st of last year. That directive came, of course, in the wake of the 2023 holding in Sackett versus the EPA, and this need to create a new program for state waters, which is a more inclusive term than waters of the United States on the federal side. After a very lengthy stakeholder process and the publication of at least 2 sets of proposed regulation 87s, there was a 3-day rulemaking held on December 8th through the 10th of last year. Rebecca, myself, and Jason attended each day of that rulemaking remotely. The River District was a party to the rulemaking effort. We did submit a written responsive pre-hearing statement on October 10th. Prior to the rulemaking hearing, that pre-hearing statement then formed the basis of our testimony at the rulemaking hearing. And very quickly, in our responsive pre-hearing statement and during the testimony that I provided during the hearing, there are about 3 discrete issues that we raised, while also acknowledging that there were many other issues raised by other parties that we technically agreed with. But in order to focus on the ones that a lot of parties were not talking about, we limited our testimony to these 3 issues. The first of which was timeframes for the division to determine or make a determination on individual authorization applications. The statute provides up to 2 years for those determinations to be made on an IA. In the proposed rule that was circulated prior to the rulemaking hearing, there was contemplation of a shorter review period for certain individual authorizations involving minimal to moderate costs or minimal or limited water quality impacts. We thought that language was a bit wishy-washy or uncertain, and requested that the division include some clarity on what is exactly a minimal to moderate cost or minimal or limited water quality impacts, to make project proponents have less of a burden running, especially if they have a less complicated authorization, to not have to spend resources and potentially money knowing that that potentially was not necessary. While we did not get that specific clarity included in a revised form of the regulation, we did get acknowledgement of the issue, not only by the division and the commission, as well as CPW and others, but also a commitment to potentially revisit this specific timeframe or this section, including those timeframes in the future, once there's more operational experience to work off of, and potentially to include that clarifying language that we had asked for. Second outstanding issue that we identified was the need to include clarifying language related to ongoing operation and mitigation requirements for long-term operations of projects or long-term projects. We argued that language in Regulation 87 found at 87.6 subparts 13 and subpart C was necessary to clarify that projects that have fully satisfied all construction-related requirements but remain subject to long-term or permanent compensatory mitigation obligations should not be required to repeatedly renew their underlying individual authorization and to have to deal with the fees associated with that. In this instance, I am pleased to report that through most of Rebecca's work, we were able to get this issue resolved. During the hearing in negotiating with division staff, they actually did include new language. I'm confident it did actually address the issue. And lastly, we, along with, I think, probably every other of the 30+ parties in the rulemaking, had some concerns with the fees. Some of those seemed a bit exorbitant. Others were loosely defined or not clear. Again, this was an issue that was raised by many parties. And the response that the division made during the rulemaking hearing, which ultimately the commission agreed with, was we have to start somewhere and we have to fund the program that's written into the statute. That makes all sorts of sense, but I think there was enough in testimony from the state staff that there will be a commitment to revisit those fees at some point in the future once we have a bit of a lifespan to work from with the regulation. I will stop there. See if there are any questions. Any of the harder questions I might direct to Rebecca, but happy to read your thoughts.
Sonia?
Director Shadow.
On the matter of some of the definitions of adjacent or abutting, now that the federal rule has updated their definitions of what that means, do you see the division having to go back and reevaluate those? So that we don't have two different definitions floating around?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm
Because remember, we had in close proximity to how close is
Right.
close? Is it definitely touching? Is it adjoining? All that?
And this issue of wetlands adjacent to and all of that sort of similar language was a big issue that a lot of the parties raised, and a lot of time was spent during the rulemaking hearing. I'm unaware if the division is undertaking any concerted efforts to address that new guidance or new rule that we got from the federal level. I don't know if Rebecca.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my thought is it's difficult to tie anything to federal definitions since they change frequently. My guess is that the way that the division crafted it is the way that they want to maintain that definition. I don't see them changing it, but I guess it may end up more being so, and how users are really interpreting that language and implementing it with talking to division on projects.
Yeah, because I think in the final definition, when we said adjacent or abutting, the federal says touching. That's not how the division interpreted those terms. It seemed to be a little bit looser, so, okay.
And I would just add, from a procedural standpoint, the rulemaking has run its course. We are waiting, if it hasn't happened already, final publication of that, of the final regulation 87. So I'd hesitate to, not sure that there would be any effort at this point to go back and redo it. That might be a little challenging, but potentially future rulemaking.
It's gonna cause a lot of confusion. And thank you for all your good work. Yeah, you guys definitely influenced that process and had an example to throw out there, which really, I think, made the division rethink their position.
Thanks for sitting through a 3-day.
It was painful.
Good on you.
Alderman?
As I
Yeah, well,
What's wrong?
As I understand it, your efforts were shown by the final work product. And I'm not gonna go into specifics of it at all, but keep it rather general. But all the people that were pushing back, it actually showed in the end by the commission and those that are actually approving the rules by making some changes, to what was being proposed versus what was adopted. Which is a little bit more in line with what the legislatures had. It's still a little bit far outreaching in my thoughts, but it's a hell of a lot better than what was out there. And what you did was not done in vain. So, and it was good to see that the River District was well represented there, well spoken, and you got good responses to your inquiries and your questions.
You, and I have to personally give a lot of kudos to Rebecca for issue spotting. One issue I didn't mention is the original definitions of the exempted activities for ditch construction and ditch maintenance was a bit messy and unclear, and in some respects contradictory. I can see for our constituents that would be a big issue, making sure there's clarity on how those exemptions may or may not apply. And Rebecca spotted that immediately. We raised that with division staff. They included revisions along with it.
Federal WOTUS.
Thank you, Peter. So starting again with Sackett, 2023 Supreme Court of the United States opinion that clarified and dramatically reduced the scope of waters of the United States, which is the standard that defines the geographic scope for federal Clean Water Act jurisdiction. That decision led to the Army Corps and the EPA under the Biden administration amending their regulations in an effort to conform with Sackett's. That effort led eventually to 2 state federal district court lawsuits in which the states challenged the agency's new rule as being much broader than what Sackett intended. Those cases were ultimately stayed due to the presidential election, change in administration. And now fast forward to 2025, the EPA and the Corps, after releasing guidance, eventually published a new proposed rule in November of last year. That proposed rule again seeks or sought to revise the regulatory definition of waters of the United States. This time, according to the Corps and the EPA, in a manner to actually more closely align with the intent of the Supreme Court in the Sackett case. I am going to focus on some of the bigger takeaways from that November 20 published rule. I think we're still sort of digesting and working our way through it, but a few things popped out immediately. Start with the new definition of relatively permanence in the rule that requires continuous surface flows through the entirety of the wet season, which may vary in duration regionally. And so the proposed rule does seek to limit federal jurisdiction to waters that are relatively permanent. And those waters are defined as standing or continuously flowing year-round, or again, during this wet season. I want to draw specific emphasis to the term wet season, because that's a new term within this regulatory landscape. And also it's undefined in the proposed rule. And I think that is something that stuck out to the council and staff immediately as potentially a bit of an oversight, something that might cause some confusion. And the other item worth mentioning is how wetlands are treated under the proposed rule. So according to the preamble, wetlands are deemed jurisdictional only if they both directly abut a federally covered water and maintain a continuous surface water connection. Again, this goes to that wet season term used a moment ago. The proposed rule was published with the announcement that public comments on the rule would be due by January 5th of this year. That deadline is now passed. So as River District staff and council were reviewing the draft rule and our own issue spotting, we also received Colorado Water Congress, the Water Quality Committee of CWCV, issues that they raised. And those issues already included the point I made earlier about this new term, wet season, being undefined, and how that concept may be challenging to apply consistently across country, let alone in Colorado, given the different regions and changing hydrography. In addition to that, the CWC's Water Quality Committee also drew attention to the retention of language that a ditch to be excluded as waters of the United States must be constructed entirely in dry land. The preamble to the proposed rule asserted that a ditch that connects to a jurisdictional tributary is not itself jurisdictional because of that connection. That, in our minds, raises a bit of a question because it's unclear how a ditch can connect to a jurisdictional tributary without being constructed at least partially within jurisdictional waters. In Colorado, for instance, most, if not all, irrigation ditches are constructed partly within tributaries. For instance, since at least the ditch head gate and its diversion structure have to be located within a water body. So exactly how this this new language or existing language regarding ditches is going to work under the proposed federal. So those were just a few of the concerns that the CWC identified. We agreed with them. Ultimately, we didn't think it was necessary for the River District to provide its own comments before January 5th. We have a seat with the CWC and felt their concerns as raised were sufficient for our purposes.
To be clear on the new rule about adjacent and upland ditches, the exemptions for agriculture still exist. So irrigation ditches would be an exempt practice anyway. So what we're talking about here is municipal or some other uses of diversion of water, which typically have to get permitting anyway. So pretty status quo.
I found the issue and whole discussion about when those ditches that are jurisdictional, when that jurisdiction is severed, that conversation, and I don't know if you guys got to that part of when it goes to an intervening use, and you might have an agricultural ditch, but then it has an intervening use of municipal water supply, that jurisdiction gets severed. I think there are a lot of cases of ditches that have both agricultural and municipal water being carried in them, so I wasn't really sure where that was
Yeah,
gonna.
that's a great point, Director Chavez, and if you recall, this was an issue early on with the Regulation 87 rulemaking as well, as these ditches that do commingle different colors of water versus how do we treat those within the ambit of the regulation? I don't think we've had a chance to specifically discuss that with respect to WOTUS, but something that we're keeping an eye on.
Any further comments? Seeing none?
Thank you.
It's done.
The next item is a discussion on the Winter Park Urban Renewal Authority proposed tax increment financing, which this board historically has taken a unfavorable eye towards TIF financing because it has the effect of these urban renewal authorities invest money into, in theory, renew an area, thereby increasing the tax valuation. But that investment under this urban renewal authority allowance is then directed back into pay back the costs of the urban renewal and not to the local taxing authorities, such as the River District. Our mill levy is so small that it's usually not a big factor. It can be a really big issue for, like library districts, school districts, and so forth that have a larger mill that are then the increased valuation, still get their base tax
financing, but the increased valuation, they wouldn't get at least for a period of time during the payback of the costs of the TIF for the meadows across the way over there where the Petco and Target are. Was on the books for a while, and I understand it just went away. Yeah, 20 years, 25 years. We got I'm hijacking part of your discussion here, Bruce, because I won't want to rush through. Bruce's memo or section of the memo on this is good, and it contains a really good discussion and a good chart that helps explain how the tax increment financing works. They are required, the Urban Renewal Authority is required to negotiate IGAs with the other taxing entities such as the River District, and how the incremental amount will be allocated. If it can't reach agreement, the statute requires that you go to mediation. At the end of the day, the Urban Renewal Authority tends to have a lot of sway and a little bit more leverage than other taxing entities would like. I'm going to pass it to you, Bruce, to just give a brief discussion of the details and where we're headed. Not seeking any board action today, but probably will.
Thank you, Peter. The town of Ware Park in 2024 established its own urban renewal authority to generate funding for investment, public improvements in a identified urban renewal area. That URA, urban renewal area, is comprised of Cooper Creek, northwest of the town proper, as well as the resort development, which is directly within the town of Winter Park. As Peter mentioned, they are obligated, the URA is, to negotiate with overlapping tax entities, of which the River District is one in this case, to come up with a intergovernmental agreement that includes a TIF incremental financing arrangement. And there's 120 days by which this negotiation occurs. Here, Director Catlin was in receipt of a letter from the town and the authority, which triggered this negotiation period here. In addition to that letter, they include a draft, very rough draft of a proposed IGA, which I've had the opportunity to look at. I should add that under the River District's policy for these types of arrangements, if there are agricultural assessed lands, that typically plays into our policy that we post these types of arrangements. Here, no agriculturally assessed lands. So we are in the process of reviewing that IGA. Another thing that the town or the authority has to do is prepare an impact assessment, explaining to overlapping tax entities, explain to us what the impact of this is on our general mill. That type of impact report that's specific to the River District has not been prepared yet. So one of the requests that we have relayed on to the canal and the authorities that they prepare that, so we have a better idea of what the actual impact is charted over this 25-year period. So that's where we're at. We're in the process of working through and including a little bit more specific detail in that draft IGA. I suspect this will be eventually teed up for an action item at a later date.
Might the River District request that the amount of money that would go to the community funding partnership stay with the River District rather than going to the TIF? I mean, that's a direct benefit to Grand County, and I think would be a reasonable request.
That's a great point. I don't think that's something off the table in terms of this negotiation. So it's worth of course raising. I will say, according to the town, the impact on the River Districts on our general mill is, to use their words, insubstantial, but they provided no numbers. So that's one of the things that we want to.
I think it's partly the principle of it, and they say that to library districts too, and cemetery districts who have an annual budget of $55,000. makes a difference. I think we should, argue to at least to pay a portion of that, just 25 years.
Sonia?
Yeah, I have some familiarity with what they're doing over there in Winter Park and it's pretty significant. Wondering if Grand County has a position on this. Counties don't often get wildly enthusiastic about TIF projects.
Yeah, I have a voicemail actually, Mr. Moyer to talk about the exact issue. You know, aside from what was relayed on in the report that the town and the URA prepared explaining their project in which they indicate support from all sorts of residents. I have not spoken to any specific.
It's been referenced, it's been represented to me by the interim town manager at Winter Park that the county commissioners are in favor of this URA. TIF financing.
It'll be good to see those numbers and what, what the impact is, and it's a great point about directing it to the river district where activities that are beneficial and aligned with the mission.
Good, that's a good suggestion, Director Chandler Henry, and consistent with our board's general direction on these things. We will report back. The last item that was teed up for discussion was the general counsel's goals and objectives. Those are outlined on page 113 of your report. Other than maybe adding how to shorten the general counsel's presentation, are there any questions about those goals and objectives? I can take them now or offline later. It's fine with me. Hearing none. Also teed up anything else. There are a couple of other discussion items in the general counsel report. If you have any questions about those, feel free to pull me, just a brief aside at any time. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Mr. President.
A good report. Yeah, we're gonna have to break you into two pieces. Next up on the agenda is for us to ask for public comments. Are there any comments from the public, whether they're here or online?
If you're online and want to make a comment, please raise your hand on the Zoom and we'll spawn it. Seeing none, you're in the room or on Zoom.
Okay. Well, thank you. We'll move on to project operations and updates from the enterprise matters.
Okay. Well, we have the water marketing policy first, Ian, and Ian, who's helping you out?
Sam is coming up with me.
All right, Sam. These guys usually show up at the end of the meeting, of a two-day meeting, and you guys, the board is awfully too kind to our project operators, so I want you to feel free to take your time with questions and inquisition, especially when Hunter gets up there.
Yeah, we will take him apart.
All right, well, good afternoon, directors. We are on page 143 of the board packet. I apologize for my voice. I lost it Saturday afternoon rooting for our Broncos, so my apologies.
Good job.
You did a good.
As most of you already know, but for our new board members, we did update the water marketing policy 20 years ago, back in 2006, to allow for annual price increases up to the Denver Aurora Lakewood CPI plus the new growth index. Contracts prior to 2006 only get adjusted for the O&M component every 5 years. And that is up for increases in 2028. So for 2026, we're just talking about the traditional annual increases. Last year, CPI was 2.5. New growth index was 1.36. So we had a total increase of 3.86. This year CPI is up slightly to 2.6. And new growth is down slightly to 1.25, so we're right at 3.85, which is right about where we were last year. For increases. Since 2011, the board has increased the amount up to the allowable amount on 4 occasions. In 2011, 2014, and more recently in 2022 and 2025. While we have seen inflation slow down and remain flat, we are still seeing increases in the cost of goods and services to the district. So staff is recommending the full increase of 3.85. Wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of our in-channel leases. Since we really have 2 supplies for in-channel leasing that we utilize, Rudite and Elkhead. Since from 2019 through 2025, we've contracted for a total amount of 17,000 acre feet out of Rudite. And from 2020 to 2025, we've contracted for over 15,000 acre feet from Elkhead. That means since 2019, the district has realized over $1.5 million from these in-channel leases. So they are of great significance to the enterprise fund, which is really funded in whole by water sales. Sometimes, the in-channel leases amount to 24% of the annual water sales revenue. And the board updated their policy in 2023 to allow for multi-year contracts for in-channel leasing up to 5 years. Sam, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, while we're talking about the significance of the channel leases, I think just a reminder about how successful our pilot project was on the Yampa last year with our releases out of Elkhead Reservoir, allowing both more water to be in the river for fish in a severely dry year when there might not have been any water in the river below Maybell, and then also allowing more diversions below that. So a lot of benefit out of the in-channel uses getting out of the reservoirs.
So staff is requesting action that the board approve the 2026 water contract pricing and recommends an increase of 3.85%.
We need a motion.
I'll move to approve.
Second.
Motion by Jacober and second by Dennison. All those in favor? Aye. Move closed. Motion passed.
Thank you.
Directors. So I had 2 recommendations or 2 requests in my memo related to Wolford and Elkhead reservoirs. The first one is for a noxious weed and vegetation management contract. I'm gonna request a revision to the action that's in the memo. I'd like to change that to a 1-year contract request, and I'll describe that later. And the next is to replace and adopt at Wolford Mountain Reservoir boat ramp. So a little background on the noxious weed and vegetation management contract request. We have a lot of acreage at Wolford and Elkhead. And we manage those with vegetation management, both for managing noxious weeds, also for dam safety. You don't want woody vegetation on a dam that prevents dam safety hazards. So we manage vegetation code projects. It's also part of some of our permits out there with the county and with federal government. So we need to continue doing that. We had a change in ownership of our longstanding weed management contractor. And we felt like this was a good opportunity to open it up to some kind of competitive bids. So we sent out a RFP to a number of contractors. We ultimately did get 2 proposals back. The most cost-effective one is with the successor of our previous contractor, EcoRx. We worked with them since 2002. Has new management now, some of the same employees. So based on their price and our history with some of their employees, we'd like to move ahead with them. I would like to make one revision though. So it's new management, new leadership. Instead of going with the 3-year request that I have in the memo, I'd like to adjust that back to a 1-year contract for $103,000. So the request, as I would like to have it amended, is to enter into a 1-year vegetation management contract with EcoRx for a not to exceed amount of $103,000.
Hunter, can I ask, the 3-year contract was 267,000.
Yep.
103 is now a third of 67.
Yeah, fair question. That's based on some subsequent conversations with the contractor. The way I had it, so a little bit more background on this. There was an untimely death of the previous owner, and a lot of the sort of institutional knowledge left with him. So I put together an RFP based on what I knew, got proposals on that, but then subsequently had a conversation with the contractor and really one of the old employees, and they said, well, you didn't really encapsulate all the work that we used to do in your RFP. So to include that, it's going to be an extra $10,000. So that's where that discrepancy comes from. So it's kind of a long explanation, but and it's also why I'd like to do this 1-year contract so that I can better understand the work, better document it, look for opportunities to reduce the costs over the next year, and then come back to the board. Hopefully with the EcoRx, but potentially with another contractor. Did that answer your question, Andy?
I think so.
Yeah.
So we need a motion to authorize a contract for 1 year for $103,000 to EcoRx.
Correct.
Need a motion?
Move.
Tom Gray, motion.
Second.
Second, Gary Martinez. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passed.
Thank you. And then my next request is to purchase a dock for the boat ramp at Wolford Mountain Reservoir. The dock that we're replacing was installed in 2006. I went out and looked at it this fall. It was in pretty awful shape. There was corrosion of the mounts. Some of the floats had been compromised, and it was uneven and honestly presented some safety hazards. So we've taken that dock out, requesting authorization to purchase a new dock. We received quotes from a couple of different companies. Colorado obviously isn't exactly like a hotspot for dock making companies, but there are a couple of places we could get them from. We would like to move ahead with, it's called a connected dock, if this I looked it up. We'd like to move ahead with them because their quote was a little bit lower than the other one. And more than that is that we already have one of these docks in the marina, and it just makes sense for us to have the same components. We can have duplicate, backup parts for the same system. We'd like to move ahead with purchase of a dock from Island Lake Marine and Sports for $61,338.20.
Would you be looking at installing that in time for this season coming up?
Definitely, yeah.
I'll move to approve.
Second. Travis?
Second from
Travis.
all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hunter. The next item on the agenda is the general manager's report. Be happy to proceed right into that, but if you prefer to take a break.
I'd like to take a break.
Okay.
We'll take a break for 10 minutes.
We'll start back up at 3:15. All right, general manager's report, the Colorado River interstate and intrastate update. I'm just gonna quickly tee something up for Raquel to walk us through it. As I think many of you are aware, the Department of Interior issued the draft environmental impact statement on the coordinated operations of Howell and Meade for the post-26 guidelines. It's a really interesting environmental impact statement for those of you who are interested in those kind of things. It doesn't have a preferred alternative, which is a real aberration from environmental impact statements. It is intentionally vague in some of its components because the idea is that if the 7 states reach an agreement, they can potentially pull from different pieces that they've modeled and create that preferred alternative, which might be the consensus-driven alternative. I can just update you today, as of today, the states have not reached an agreement. They continue to meet. They met for 4 days last week. I think in my memo, I said I was optimistic that they would reach an agreement on these operating guidelines. I would say that my optimism is fading. So unfortunately, there are some good ideas out there. Many of them, as you will see from Raquel's presentation, many of them contain upper basin conservation measures. And we've known that for quite some time. The writing is on the wall that if in fact there is a consensus approach, our state and the other upper basin states have put voluntary conservation on the table in these negotiations. That conservation presently includes, but is not limited to, conserved consumptive use. So pay to fallow concepts in practical application. This board and district have done quite a bit of work on studying conserved consumptive use programs. In fact, on your director's page, there is a link to a PDF packet that has a compendium of all of the work that we've done since about 2007 or so on, or not 2007, 2019, excuse me. It would, I think, Director Chavez asked us to put that together. It is there for your use and downloading. We haven't moved it over to the public page yet, but we will shortly. I think we're just waiting for council to clarify that there's no confidential information in there. But it is, it's something that we've spent a lot of time working on. And at this point, our direction from this board has been engaged heavily on that with the state, with our water users, with others in the upper basin. Seeing the likely outcome of any agreed upon solution is going to involve this. We just want to make sure that while all 4 corners of the state benefit from the Colorado River, we'd like to make sure that all 4 corners participate with wet water in a conserved consumptive use program. And that the West Slope doesn't become the sacrifice zone or the dry up zone for either other parts of our state or frankly to fuel growth in the lower basin. So it's a tricky walk. President Catlin in his other role as senator and many of our elected representatives involved with water and water legislation have been visited by folks who operate operations within our district, those who have acquired them, it seems in the last 10 years since the market-based discussions have erupted, who really want to see this concept move forward and really want to see a market set up with very few guidelines, very little local and regional involvement. The idea for some of these investment companies is to monetize their investment and get return for their investors who generally live out of state, somewhere on the eastern seaboard. It is of great concern to us that a program be set up to help preserve family ranches and farms and vibrant communities in our district, but not set up to help outside interests profiteer off of taking the water out of Western Colorado. We've had a lot of good discussions with our water users and some of the ag groups and others. We look forward to more discussions on those issues. We believe that to the extent that program is going to move forward under a 7-state agreement, it would need legislation within our state to authorize it to occur. If that's moving forward, we intend to be part of that. We do not anticipate that happening this year. I know there have been some questions from folks about that. We would anticipate, however, that those programs will ramp up over the next few years and therefore require some statutory changes within our state. At that point, I think the district will be very involved in trying to help make sure that legislation is created in a way to, as best as possible, protect the interests of our constituents. But with that, I want to turn it over to Raquel Flinker. She's going to lead a discussion that Peter and I can't but help chime in occasionally. But Raquel, as you all will remember, was recently elevated to the position of Director of Interstate and Regional Water Resources here at the district. She's doing an amazing job and is going to lead us through relatively quickly through a very complex document and talk about what we're looking at here. It's all you, Raquel.
Thank you, Andy, for setting the stage, and hopefully I can live to the expectation. I don't know how fast this is gonna be, but I'm hoping 15, 20 minutes, and then I'm sure you'll have questions, and Peter and Andy, feel free to add. As Peter mentioned earlier, we're still in the process of going through this lengthy document. This is our first take on the concerns we see with some of this approach. But we're still going to dive deeper as we work on comments, so there's more to come. So I wanted to first touch on the timeline through this process. So the EIS process has started, it really started in 2022. There was pre-scoping and scoping phases. We did provide comments during both of these phases, emphasizing that hydrology, not reservoir levels, must drive post-2026 operations. Depletion accounting must replace delivery accounting in the lower basin to account for transit and evaporative losses. And operational guidelines must address a wide range of hydrologic futures, as well as other points. So we've been engaged in this process since the beginning. And the draft EIS was released a week and a half ago. And so that was somewhat delayed. Originally, the timeline had this EIS being released even in 2024. So looking forward, the deadline for draft comments on the draft EIS is March 2nd. We are going to have comments by then. February 14th is the deadline for the 7 states to submit their alternative, if they have consensus and an alternative. The final EIS is hopefully going to be released this summer because the current 07 guidelines expire end of September. So just a brief overview. There are 5 alternatives that are discussed in this draft EIS. There's a no action alternative, a basic coordination alternative. These are just different names, right? And then there's these 3 last ones: enhanced coordination, maximum operational flexibility alternative, and lastly, the supply driven alternative. I'll go through each of these ones, but a few important points before I do that. As Andy highlighted, the reclamation has not identified a preferred alternative in this draft. They anticipate identifying one in the coming months, and which could incorporate bits and pieces of these 5 alternatives that we'll talk about. And this preferred alternative will only be analyzed fully in the final EIS. The alternatives you will see today, if you remember a year ago, there was the alternatives report that was put out. These alternatives are somewhat similar, and they speak to, in similar ways, to the 5 alternatives that were laid out in that document a year ago. And similarly to that document, the upper basin and lower basin proposals were not modeled separately. Concepts from the upper basin and lower basin proposals were incorporated in alternative 5, that in this case is named supply driven alternative. And the last point I want to make is that the secretary intends this new agreement to last around 20 years, but is open to shorter duration and a phased approach. And that is, to some extent, I'm sure going to be guided by the potential hopeful consensus between the 7 seats.
If I could just point out that I mentioned this in my memo, but the negotiators from Nevada and Arizona at the CRUA conference in the middle of December indicated that they felt that there was no ability to reach a 20-year deal at this point, and they would like to see a 5-year deal reached. I think a 5-year deal puts the district in our state, the Upper Basin, at greater risk without any leverage. Right now, we're in full compliance, no matter how you interpret the compact in terms of water being delivered at Leaf Ferry. If you look at reasonable hydrologic predictions this year included, we can easily see those deliveries dropping below the 82.5 million over 10 that the lower basin believes is our obligation under the compact. And frankly, getting close to or violating the 75 million over 10 that is understood to be our non-depletion obligation at Leaf Ferry by the Upper Basin. So I much rather fight about something while we're actually in compliance with it than fighting while our compliance is while we're in violation of an agreement. So the fact that that 5-year deal is being raised and pushed by lower basin representatives at this point in the game is not coincidental or accidental. Some people believe that that was a planned stalling technique and then a shoot for a shorter deal to then gain leverage in the negotiations later. So on top of which, if you have a 5-year deal, negotiations stop in this year and then restart the next day. So, and so it just doesn't actually provide any long-term certainty for anyone in the system. Sorry.
Thank you. So a little bit on the purpose and needs that are identified in the document, and these are the same purpose and needs as identified in the scoping document. And I'm just highlighting a few points. So purpose to provide predictability to entities that receive Colorado River water. Only entities that can have predictability on receiving Colorado River water really are in the lower basin right here. We live within our hydrology. Predictability is not a real thing. Second, provide mechanisms for conservation, storage, and delivery of water. Then provide new opportunities for tribes to benefit from their water rights. And in the purpose and need, there is a recognition of the imbalance between water supply and demand. But to us, it seems that supply and demand needs to be prioritized for the system to be sustainable. And that should be prioritized over predictability and flexibility that some of these alternatives have. Also want to highlight what the geographic scope is of this document. Here's a map of the river, the Colorado River Basin. The geographic scope of the EIS, and this is my attempt in it, so it's probably not perfect, but just to illustrate, is the red area. So it's it begins at full pool of Lake Powell and extends downstream along the main stream of the Colorado River floodplain to the border with Mexico. So this is the limitation of the scope, but it does include management strategy activities upstream of Lake Powell in it, including, right, as Andy mentioned, conservation in the upper basin, as well as releases from initial CRISP units. But it does say that these releases would remain within the scope of their records of decision. And that is, I guess, how they accommodate doing that, even though it's out of the geographic scope. All right, so now I will go through a little bit of a detail with each of these 5 alternatives. And for each of these 5 slides, you'll see a similar table. And I just want to set the stage and just go over the headings of this table so that hopefully it will help us when we move through. So the first column talks about reductions of water usage in the lower basin mainly. The second column talks about releases out of Powell. Third column talks about buckets of water in Powell or Meade and how big they are to store conservation water in the lower basin and in the upper basin. Fourth column will mainly be skipping over those. It talks about surplus. We don't see, this is not a real concern at the current moment, unfortunately, so we won't be diving into that. And the last is talking about additional activities above Lake Powell. So this is a no action alternative, alternative 1. It is not a continuation of current operations, but it's based on operating guidance prior to the 07 interim guidelines, okay? It has pretty minimal reductions in the lower basin, maximum of 600,000 acre feet. We talk about how evaporative and transit losses in the lower basin are approximately 1.5 million acre feet, so this is not enough. Releases out of Lake Powell are basically at 8.23 million acre feet, which is quite high. We have not seen releases this high in the recent years because of low inflows into Powell. There is no new conservation mechanisms, water conservation mechanisms in the lower basin or in the upper basin identified. Second alternative is the basic coordination alternative. This is the option that could be adopted if there are no new agreements and if there's no consensus between the 7 states. In terms of reductions of water use in the lower basin, it would ramp up to 1.48 million acre feet, which is that evaporative transit loss, but it would ramp up to that and stop there. And as you'll see when I talk about the analysis on how these alternatives do, that is not sufficient. In terms of Lake Powell releases, it would range between 7 and 9.5, but really the document talks about it would be primarily at 8.23, and sometimes it would be above that, sometimes a little bit below, but it would be around 8.23. There would not be new water conservation mechanisms above or below Lake Powell, so not in the lower basin or in the lower basin, upper or lower basin. There would be releases from CRISP upper initial units within their respective records of decision to protect infrastructure, mainly Lake Powell. And then here I want to show you these 3 highlighted in this red box points that are concerning because they're very non-specific, right? So identify conditions when additional reductions may be needed to avoid critical low elevations. Identify conditions when additional action may be needed for infrastructure protection. Identify conditions when additional upper basin actions may be needed to protect infrastructure. And the problem with this non-specificity is that because it's non-specific, it's not being modeled. At least that's my understanding. And so us and the general public, we cannot understand the full implications of these non-specific points. The last point is particularly concerning because we have heard that this language is code to water in participating projects. We have a number of participating projects in our district, and so that is quite concerning. Also, you know, Lake Powell is a much bigger.
Colorado River Storage Project Act of 1956, there were initial units, that's Powell, Flaming Gorge, Aspinall Unit, and Navajo. And then there were participating units, which include Ridgeway or Dallas Creek, Crawford, number of
Silt.
Silverjack, Silt. Wayne Aspinall fought for all of those. We got funding for some of them, but they're talking about potentially shutting off or draining those projects is the concern under this option. It may go beyond the participating projects as well. You could look at the Colorado Big Thompson project, the Fry Arc project, West Slope. That could involve Root Eye and Green Mountain Reservoir. So it's really unknown, but it could have tremendous effects on water users throughout western Colorado. Although the Yampa doesn't have any federal projects, so you guys probably fine. Yeah.
So would that also affect the Front Range because?
It would impact the Front Range, and it would throw into questions, all sorts of questions about our about public health, safety and welfare issues and when and where water can be used and can't be used. I mean, it would really create remarkable chaos, I think, to be fair.
And that just add the legal ability, lack thereof, of the Bureau to reach up through Lake Powell into those participating projects is certainly subject to question.
Yeah, so that's the option if no new agreements were existing. So now we're gonna go through alternatives 3, 4, and 5, which are more significant in terms of conservation in the lower basin and the upper basin and other factors. So this third alternative is the enhanced coordination alternative. It's informed by basin tribes and other federal agency proposals. It tries, it's the one that has the most significant upper basin conservation. So in terms of reductions of usage in the lower, there's a little bit of a lag. In the lower basin, they would begin when meat is below 60% full. So if meat is over 60%, overuse in the lower basin would continue. There would be no reductions. When it's at 60%, reductions would start at 1.3 million acre feet. They would ramp up to a maximum of 3 million acre feet. In terms of Lake Powell releases, they would range between 4.7 and 10.8 million acre feet. And you'll see a few boxes highlighted now for conservation, water conservation activities. So there would be conservation activities, mechanisms for conservation activity in the lower basin and in the upper basin. There would be 2 buckets of water in Lake Mead to accommodate this conservation. One of them, the entities in the lower basin that conserve would have a specific pool. The other pool is a more generic pool to benefit the basin more as a whole. And then there would be a bucket of water in Lake Powell for water conservation in the upper basin. And you can see here in this last column what those conservation, the magnitude of those conservation activities. It would start at 200,000 acre feet per year for the first 5 years. It would then move to 275,000 acre feet per year. And it would reach 350,000 acre feet, which is, it's just for sure concerning, as Andy was talking about earlier. Realistically, where this water could come from is a question mark. And know that, right, people would be compensated. So there's also a question around the compensation to allow for this significant amount of water. And I do want to also highlight that conserved water in this alternative would not be operationally neutral. So it would be seen in the reservoirs and impact how the reservoirs are operating and in which tier and how lower basin reductions are triggered. And last, well, there are 2 last. Go ahead.
If we can just for a moment, Raquel, just to put it in context, so that far right column, the additional activities between starting at 200,000 acre feet a year and going up to as much as 350,000 acre feet a year. That compares, if you compare it to what has been done recently, the System Conservation Pilot Program. In our state, there were last year under System Conservation Pilot Program, 16,000 acre feet conserved at a price of somewhere around $8 million. That's a far cry from 350,000 acre feet or even 200. Think about it this way, our state is entitled to 51.75% of the water that the upper basin has available for consumptive use. Any conservation program where we're contributing water into a pool, I think we should reasonably expect the other upper basin states to anticipate that the state of Colorado will be contributing 51.75% or approximately that much into that pool. We're talking on the low end under this proposal, about 100,000 acre feet being generated in our state. And, significantly more than that as the years pass. Given the fact that our consumptive use in our most of our district is somewhere around 2 to 2.5 acre feet per irrigated acre, you quickly dry up acreage if it's only coming out of western Colorado of significant magnitude that could impact our entire economy in western Colorado. So something to think about. Those are huge numbers. Our state has not put anything close to that on the table in these negotiations, but please note that others have. Again, this was put together by the basin tribes, and that's primarily a coalition of lower basin tribes with some help from the Jicarilla Apache, I believe, out of New Mexico. So just keep in mind, those are big numbers. I do believe that the upper basin tribes would like to participate in that with water that has not been consumed historically, but they have legal right to. And I certainly understand the tribe's desire to do that. It does bring into question if this is water that they haven't been consuming and someone else has. If they're contributing into a pool, what happens to the people who are contributing it or were used to consuming it previously? And I think most of those parties who have been consuming it are actually down in the lower basin. So there could be some really significant impacts all around. But sorry.
No, thank you for that. And then two last things in this alternative is it allows for extensive flexibilities for all users, intra and interstate transactions within each basin. And at present, we are potentially okay with this language. We're okay with transactions in the lower basin, but in the upper basin, they could be concerning. So we're okay, but it poses some issues or concerns. And lastly, to Andy's point, tribal water, both conserved, consumptive use, and unused, could be a part of these conservation pools in Meade and Powell.
Raquel, doesn't that sentence, extensive flexibilities for all users intra and interstate, indicate that you create a water market for the lower basin to purchase water out of the upper basin?
It says within each basin.
It does, but it also says interstate.
It does. In the lower basin, Arizona, California, and Nevada have really been pushing to be able to engage in interstate water marketing. In fact, they are engaged in interstate water within their basin. That's this proposal.
Don't worry, that
concern. The next one coming up inter basin. Yeah.
All right, so the next one, and oh, where is my next one? Sorry, it will come up soon enough.
Internet looks like it's having trouble.
Okay, it might now flip.
It was there.
Okay, there it goes. So this is the fourth alternative, maximum operational flexibility alternative. It is the one that is that has the most reductions in the lower basin. And you'll see later on, that it's the one that ends up faring the best when in the analysis mainly because of that, I would say. So this alternative is based on proposal from the Consortium of Conservation Organization. It tries to benefit key resources while protecting critical infrastructure. The way it does that is that the pool of conserved water in the upper basin, lower basin, it can be or in Powell or in Meade, depending on what resources you want to protect and what infrastructure you want to protect. And then Director Gray, to your question earlier, the flexibilities in this alternative include interstate and interbasin transactions, which are concerning. So the reduction of use in the lower basin starts at 80% full, and they look at multiple reservoirs here. So above that, no reduction in use, but below that, yes, and it would ramp up and reach 4 million acre feet. Releases out of Powell would range from 5 to 11 million acre feet. And this alternative does specify that if Powell was at or below 3510, it would be operated as run of the river. So last year we had, 4.7-ish million acre feet coming in. Then you would take out evaporation. That's what would come out of Powell. So it is a future that I think is hard to think it could exist, but this is the only alternative that actually clearly specifies what would happen in such a dire condition. When we look at conservation mechanisms, there are new conservation mechanisms above and below Powell. And as I alluded to, this conservation pool, so conservation in the lower basin at times could be stored in Powell and vice versa. They could move water around these two to benefit the Grand Canyon, for example, also to benefit the delta of the Colorado River. And also, sorry, I didn't mention this, but also significant conservation above Powell, 200,000 acre feet on average. And lastly, extensive flexibilities, including interstate and interbasin. And as Andy has talked about this, it would probably put significant pressure on West Slope Ag, West Slope Water. Also, we don't think this is legally doable under our interpretation of the compact, but this alternative calls out for that flexibility.
I think it is key on that proposal there. There's that run of the river it is really a positive attribute of this measure, and that basically when the Powell drops down to almost losing power pool, then the lower basin ends up in the same situation we have been in, which is living within the hydrology of the river. It would be a very hard reality to adjust to in the lower basin, but it's one that if people are unable or unwilling to adjust to that, I think we will all very quickly find out what happens when you have non-operational reservoirs that can't deliver any water out of it. And so, Raquel's going to get to a graph, I think, that will show. No, we're not going to.
I'm going to just do highlights.
Explain it. Okay, perfect. Good.
Hopefully that will be beneficial. So the last alternative is the supply-driven alternative. It incorporates concepts from the upper division and lower division states proposal. Powell releases are 65% of the 3-year average natural flow at Lee's Ferry. So in terms of reductions in the lower basin, they would reach a maximum of 2.1 million acre feet. And you'll see later it doesn't seem to be enough, and is why this alternative doesn't perform as good as the previous alternative, right? It has half of the reduction of usage in the lower basin as compared to the previous one. So yes, Lake Powell releases 65% of 3-year natural flow, 65% is too high of a number. Why this later on also doesn't perform as well. But the range is similar to the previous two alternatives. It ranges from 4.7 to 12 million acre feet. And this concept of 65% of a natural flow or any percentage of a natural flow was being discussed by the 7 states last spring. It doesn't seem to be on the table anymore, but it was modeled as part of this alternative. In terms of new conservation mechanisms above and below Powell, the lower basin conservation water in Mead would be operationally neutral. But the upper basin conservation water would not. And so that water could just be released downstream, right, and allow for higher usage in the lower basin, which is concerning. There would be similarly to the previous alternative up to 2,000 acre feet of conserved water in the upper basin. And in this say that again. 200, what is it?
You said 200.
200,000 acre feet. This alternative does contemplate releases of water from the initial units by up to 500,000 acre feet per year within their RODS, record of decision. But no, you know, the problem with releases from the initial units is that that water doesn't get replenished every year, right? Necessarily, you have to fill that back up. So this is not a sustainable solution for you to tap into this water year in, year out. And lastly, similar to alternative 3, it allows for interstate exchanges within each basin. Oh, lastly, this last point talks about in years when Powell cannot meet its required water year release, additional gap water is introduced into the system and tracked. Gap water, we are unclear exactly what that is. So we'll hopefully find out, but maybe it is more conservation in the upper basin. Maybe it is paper water. We're unclear on what that is.
The reclamations modelers have at times in the past used something that to make the system come into balance that they call magic water. And that seems to be what that gap water is. It just magically appears. Those of us who live in the basin of origin, the upper basin, should be concerned about what kind of magic they're going to work to make that.
So now I'm going to shift to talk about the analysis that was done to evaluate these 5 alternatives. And this EIS they're analyzing these alternatives in 3 different hydrologies, future hydrologies. And when we describe these hydrologies, we talk about natural flow at Lee's Ferry. So just brief explanation, natural flow is the flow that would have been observed if there were no upstream reservoirs or diversions. And we're looking at natural flow at Lee's Ferry. So right below Glen Canyon Dam, and here's a zoom in to that area. Lee's Ferry is this blue triangle, is the USGS gauge at Lee's Ferry. So this is what we're talking about when we're talking about natural flow at Lee's Ferry. So these are the 3 hydrologic categories that were analyzed. So there's an average ranges. So know that these are being analyzed for 20 years, right? So the average is an average of 10 to 14 million acre feet over 10 years. So 2027 to 2046. Dry is 10 to 12 million acre feet over this 20 years, critically dry 8 to 10. And true, 20-year running average has not been below 12 million acre feet. That's true. But remember that the natural flow average from 1906 to 2006 was basically 15 million acre feet. The natural flow average from 2000 to 2024 dropped 2.5 million acre feet and is at 12.4 million acre feet. So looking at critically dry conditions, given what we've heard from climate science, is really critical. This is why the 07 guidelines fell short, right? 07 guidelines didn't anticipate us living in continuously dry hydrology, or drier than what we had lived. So it is good that these three hydrologic categories are being modeled. And then lastly, I just want to emphasize that annual flows have been below 10 million acre feet 8 times since 2000. So if we get those 8 years and they fall in a row, we're going to be in pretty dire conditions. And what we're seeing this year is quite concerning, right? So how do these fare? All right. So under the average hydrology, 12 to 14 million acre feet, not surprisingly, all the alternatives perform okay, like they perform pretty good, other than the no action alternative. No action alternative, even under average hydrology, is problematic. Under the dry hydrology, only alternatives 3 and 4, the ones with the highest reductions in usage in the lower basin, perform reasonably well. But even under this reasonably well, Lake Mead would be at critical elevation 5% of the time in this 20-year. And of course, this is a model, right? It's not perfect. It's just giving us some range of what could happen. Critically dry hydrology is what is quite concerning. No alternative does well. Alternative 4, the one with the highest reductions in the lower basin, is the one that performs the least poorly. And what does that mean? Under this one, the one that performs the least poorly, Powell would be at critical elevation 10% of the time. Mead would be at critical elevation 45% of the time. So Mead would be producing no power, or basically producing no power 45% of the time. Mead dead pool related reductions would happen 20% of the time. What does that mean? Mead would not be able to release water needed to supply users downstream 20% of the time. But to accomplish this, which is already problematic, average lower basin reductions would be over 3 million acre feet. Average releases out of Powell would be less than 6 million acre feet. And Andy, you alluded to this earlier, right? It's like to protect infrastructure, it's not possible to make high releases out of Powell. And we would, if we are living under critically dry hydrology conditions in the future, we would most likely not be able to meet 75 million acre feet over 10 years. The math would not work. So our key concerns from these alternatives are that balancing demand and supply must be prioritized. The proposed alternatives do not accommodate probable dry hydrologic future that has been identified by climate science as potentially already happening in our basin, right? One alternative contemplates non-specific potential additional actions to protect infrastructure that is non-specific and hasn't been modeled and becomes hard for us to understand the implications. One alternative contemplates interstate and interbasin transactions. And lastly, that several alternatives include annual conservation contributions from the upper basin of between 200 and 350. And no, these are average numbers, right? Like at times, conservation could be above this, which is concerning. So
the conservation on that, just to be clear, is above and beyond the water shortages that our water users already experience through our intrastate water administration. So when a call comes down the river, if it's the Cameo call and it's shutting off upstream junior rights, or the Shoshone call, or it's a call made on the Uncompahgre at the M&D Canal, shutting off 80% of the water rights in the upper Uncompahgre. Those don't count towards this conservation. There would have to be conservation stacked on top of that already extremely dry situation in order to reach that annual contribution level. So it really is significant in the Upper Basin has repeatedly said, look, in dry years, we really don't have any additional water to contribute. These conservation pools, under some circumstances, aren't responsive to that criticism at all. And so there would be expected additional contributions even during those extreme dry years, and have a hard time figuring out where that would come from unless you're just turning off the major projects in western Colorado and delivering what would have been delivered to farms downstream. So, yeah. Al?
Are they assuming that you're starting this whole program out with a full reservoir? I mean, we're at 25 and 27% today-ish.
They have an analysis looking at the potential of what hydrology you would need for the next 5 years to fall in critical conditions. So yes, my understanding, but it's something we'll have to dig a little bit deeper into, is that they're starting their modeling with current conditions. But given that, right, we have very little buffer in the system to accommodate continuously critically dry hydrology. And I think that is our biggest concern when we look at this and they don't perform under that scenario.
The magic water.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry.
Tom, did you want?
Tom, do you have a question?
Oh, I was just, yeah, I did, but let's go ahead.
So if we have to supply 200 to 300,000 additional acre feet, we're gonna be pulling water out of Navajo and all the others. And they won't fill back up. So what are they predicting would happen the next year?
Yeah, so this conservation water is not releases from the upper initial units. That's separate and apart from that. So conservation would come from activities of some conserved consumptive use type activities within our state. So water users foregoing their.
Do we have that much water that is being?
Oh, yeah, we consume in our state, Pierre, an average of 2.1.
2 to 2.3, something
Yeah,
like that.
2.3 million acre feet, our entire state.
How much is Front Range?
About 500 to 600,000 a year is depleted by the Front Range.
And roughly speaking, very rough, half of that is pre-compact and half of it is post-compact use. Pre-compact being exempt from mandatory curtailment under the compact.
Yeah, what, 600,000 or the 2.1?
The average 2 to 2.4.
Exempt even if the Bureau of Reclamation is making the decisions?
Exempt in my book.
Exempt under the compact.
Under the compact.
Unless the Supreme Court interprets the compact differently.
There are some, but few reclamation projects that are pre-compact.
But to your question as well, is this alternative has these releases from the initial units at 500,000 acre feet per year potentially. And yes, it is a problem. Like, this water wouldn't just reappear the next year, right? You would have to fill for you to rebuild storage in the initial units, you would be holding water there and less water would be going to Powell. Right? You can't have it both ways. So it's not, you can use the initial units for a few years for some release, but not necessarily reoccurring.
Sonia?
So with the area that they've restricted the EIS to other comments on, we cannot comment on what the impacts to the communities where these CRSP reservoirs are, Blue Mesa, the Aspinall unit or on the systems or the communities. Is that my understanding?
No,
I would say
we
you
can comment
Yeah.
on anything that's in the EIS and we
Okay.
definitely talk about conservation activities up here as well as operations of the initial units. The vague, references to, other activities in the upper basin definitely deserve to be commented on.
Okay, okay.
Now, whether the document provides sufficient information for the reader to discern what the actual impacts would be of the various actions is another, that's another question, right? But yes, you can comment on it for sure and raise those exact questions as to whether those impacts, related impacts are adequately disclosed.
One of the interesting things to me, for instance, that, an environmental impact statement is supposed to evaluate the environmental impact of all the activities that it's addressing. So if you have on-farm conservation of 350,000 acre feet of water a year in the upper basin, think about all the wildlife habitat that would be destroyed by that, right? And the late season return flows that would not occur because of that. I don't see anywhere in this environmental impact statement where any of that is taken into consideration. And it would certainly lead me to believe that it could be challenged from a legal perspective as for being insufficient. And, it's just one of those oddities about the vagueness of this particular EIS that it's, we sit and talk about the economy on the West Slope and the human impacts, and that's very important. There's a huge environmental impact of drying up places like West Slope agriculture that isn't addressed by this at all, and that frankly, we believe they're obligated to address in their environmental impacts.
For wildfire mitigation.
Wildfire mitigation, all sorts of things.
What is attached to agricultural lands? They're shot. It's done.
I have to agree with you, Andy, because I'm looking at how this draft EIS is done. Nobody else in their right mind could get away with this. There's no even recommendation. And when you're looking at conservation, there's supposed to be multiple alternatives on there, and all I see is a number. You got to conserve 500,000 acre feet. Okay, how? That should be the depth of this type of EIS, but even looking at, well, what happens if you go back to the original operations to where Powell is the storage bucket for the upper basin, as was originally intended? There's a lot of scrutiny for this thing here, and I've read it, but Raquel, you really helped me understand a little bit more things that I really didn't comprehend, but this thing stinks. I'd fire my consultant.
So these reductions in the upper basin, are they contemplated under these alternatives to be mandatory?
No, I believe under these alternatives, they are contemplated to be voluntary and compensated. But compensated by whom? That's a good question. The upper basin has, at least to date, taken the position that the funding should come from the federal government. You might note the federal government isn't funding a lot of things right now, so it's.
They owe 40 trillion.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to imagine that funding will materialize. So that's. Yeah, I want to move on because this is really important stuff, but I just think that we need to keep the meeting moving. It is disturbing. It is, I think the key take home I would just point out again, and Nicole made it earlier. It is my understanding that, look, if we're going to have operating guidelines put out by the federal government to run Meade and Powell, shouldn't their entire purpose and need be to bring the demand in balance with the supply?
Yes.
And under the proposals, as you just saw, under very likely hydrology, right? Under the 8 to 10 million acre foot river that we may see. Frankly, climate scientists who with great expertise are predicting every one of those alternatives fail. It doesn't manage the crisis that we're facing. And it is a testament to politics getting in the way of hydraulic and I'm not pointing fingers, it's our politics as much as it is the lower basin's politics. It is a problem that every human being and every animal who live in this basin should be concerned about. So, the inability to find a solution that meets the actual water supply is a problem. And you can ask the leaders in Tehran what happens when you can't do that. Right?
So Andy, do you think the negotiators for the 7 states are now focusing on these 5, or are they still off just doing?
In large part, the negotiations have been occurring around elements of that's in these 5 proposals.
So I just have a question. After February 14th, if there's nothing to comment on based on some settlement agreement, are we, the board, going to weigh in on our River District comments that are due by March 1st?
That's a good question. We would do our best to get draft comments out to you, and because we have those bi-weekly legislative meetings, we would ask you to weigh in on those right before the March 2nd date that they're due. So sometime I don't have the calendar right in front of me, but yes, we will try to get them to you. We probably won't be able to give you a huge lead time, but if you guys can look at them and then we can have them, incorporate those into a meeting, that would be helpful. Okay.
Or maybe just have some conversations before the comments are drafted.
Yes.
So that input from us could be.
Well, that's why we had just had this discussion. So if you have input today, fantastic. If you have thoughts as you move on and maybe dig into the document if you want, or just have thoughts in general, please reach back out to Raquel, Peter, and myself, and we're happy to incorporate them.
Thank you. Well, and I think it's like all problems, at some point, rather than just comment on what we don't like, we could be a part of a solution, but we have to really coalesce around what that solution we might be proposing is. Which it's going to take some thought, but there's nothing more important right now going on, in my mind.
Yep, agreed. Okay. On that cheery note, we'll move on to the current state of Colorado River Basin hydrology. Sam and Raquel, are you back up? And you can see why that 8 to 10 million acre foot river looks like a potential reality here. Raquel and Sam, are you guys?
Yeah, we're gonna keep the good news rolling.
More good than you will, please.
Okay, well. Yeah, disclaimer, it doesn't get any rosier. I'll start out with the West Slope picture. Where the story is record warmth. So this, both of these images show the beginning of the water year, the first quarter, October through December this year. And you can see across the state that darker red color on the map on the left. Those are all areas that saw record warmth in that period. So it's essentially the entire state, statewide, was record warm. It was also record warm in December. November was third warmest on record. So a pretty rough start to the year. On the right, that quadrant chart incorporates precipitation along with temperature. So the horizontal axis goes from dry on the left to wet on the right, and the vertical goes from cool on the bottom to warm on the top. And you can see 2025 is that star at the very top in the middle, quite an outlier in terms of temperature. On average, our average temperature for this period was 1.6 degrees Fahrenheit, warmer than the second warmest year, which is 2017, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's very significant for an average temperature for this 3-month period. And you can see where, I guess I should clarify, this is for the Colorado River drainage within the state. So this is essentially the entire West Slope. And for that region, at least, precipitation is pretty close to normal. although I'll complicate that picture a little bit going forward. I just wanted to point out too, this is really the same story across the west. So essentially the entire Intermountain West has been record dry. That darker red hue again is record warm for the October to December 2025 period. So we're not alone in this. Moving to precipitation, these maps both show the same thing. I just wanted to show you a little more granularity on the right. So that's just goes down to the sub-basin level. Because there is variation within these that kind of gets hidden with that map you usually see on the left. We can see the Colorado headwaters have been the driest so far this water year. This is the beginning of the water year, basically to date. A lot of precipitation across the west slope came in October, and that's where you see some of this variation. That major precipitation event largely hit the southwest. And so, for example, in the Colorado headwaters, we range, that the basin overall is at 72% of average. But if you look at the Blue River, for example, that drainage was only at 65%, whereas down the Colorado Plateau region, we're up at 88%. Unfortunately, that didn't help our snow very much because that largely came in October when we can't store very much. So even that 72% number for the Colorado headwaters is a little rosier than things actually are. And then you see similar variation in the Gunnison and Yampa White, where the extremes to the north and south got a little bit more moisture. So moving through our three major basins in the River District, the Yampa White is up there roughly tied for the most precipitation of the three basins with close to normal. You can see in the plot on the left, kind of a big spike early on. That's the October precipitation that I was talking about. And you can see we got well above the median there, but then flattened out for quite a while. And so that brings us to today where we're close to the median, but not quite. But then that really doesn't translate into our snowpack, and that's really due to that record warmth we're seeing. So even though we're pretty close to normal precipitation, we're only at 71% of the median snowpack for the state. And as with the Colorado Headwaters Basin, we've been setting records. We've had a couple of years of record low snowpack in the Yampa White Basin so far. So this is the Colorado headwaters. Again, precipitation is a bit lower than the other basins. We're down around 75% of the median. And our snowpack is even worse, getting closer and closer to half of the median. And we've been setting records for over a month now, cumulatively over the water year. And on to the Gunnison, this again, was tied with the Yampa White roughly for precipitation as a percent of normal. And you can see here, it's really pronounced that that October, so early season precipitation. We may even set a record for a day or two. But again, that was so early, not much of it got stored as snow, not much of it fell as snow. And so we're not seeing that translate into the snowpack where we're down below 60% of average. So soil moisture, this is the map that's typically published by the CBRFC, the Colorado River Basin Forecast Center. Should apologize to Raquel. This is a model. So this is essentially what feeds into the forecasts that tell us what to expect in terms of water supply from April to July period. So it's not an on-the-ground measurement, but it's what feeds kind of most directly into our water supply forecast. So that's kind of why I'm showing it here. You can see this fall we were below average to begin with. And I just want to point out that they typically report soil moisture numbers at this time, mid-November, because at that point they're basically locked in for the season. Or that's the assumption, because from then on, we accumulate snow, we don't have any snow melt. And so this is we have some, but for the most part, we're accumulating snow. The soil moisture is not really changing over the winter. That's not really been the case so far, again, because of that warmth. So we've had precipitation falling as rain, or what would otherwise fall as snow. The snow line has been a lot higher this year, and we've had a lot of higher elevation snow melt than usual. So we've actually seen increasing soil moisture through early January, which is not what we would expect. And while we generally like more soil moisture because it translates to more water in the river in the spring when the snow really starts to melt, the problem here is that we're not even storing that snowpack. So we're not getting that kind of that natural reservoir that we typically have. So improving soil moisture in this case isn't necessarily a good thing. So moving on to drought, more good news. So this is a year ago today, essentially. Most of the West Slope was drought free. We did have some moderate drought in the northwest corner, but not a bad picture on the West Slope. Moving forward to this past August, this is kind of our peak drought from this year. So we had, I think, parts of 9 counties in exceptional drought, the most extreme stage, and essentially the entire rest of the West Slope was, or of the river district certainly was in extreme drought. Things have since improved, although we are 100% in the upper Colorado River Basin. There is no portion of that basin that is not in some sort of drought condition. And still have parts of, I think, 5 or 6 counties in extreme drought conditions with pockets of exceptional drought. Those are not shown.
No, just if someone is lost on the map, just to show where Colorado is, it's like top right-ish of each of these maps. If that's helpful.
Yeah, sorry my arrows lag, but yeah, I should have overlain our river district boundaries, but it's, you can kind of recognize the well, you can look at the sticker on my laptop and find that looking forward, this is our seasonal temperature and precipitation outlook for the next 3 months. It essentially looks identical to what I showed you at our fall meeting. Not much has changed. We're sort of on the cusp between equal chances and basically worse conditions than normal. We have been in a weak La Nina phase, and that is beginning to transition to neutral. And then we are potentially expecting El Nino to come in late summer or in the fall, which may improve moisture in the region. So moving on to River District assets. This is Snowtail group plot for the basin above Wolford Mountain Reservoir. And you can see where we're right kind of trending with 2021. And I don't know how well you remember 2021. It was not the best year. I think, yeah, so the water supply season in 2021, we saw 46% of average runoff into Wolford that year. So at least as things are going today, I'm expecting something pretty dire. But you can also see how steeply things improved in February with some major storms. So you never know. I don't want to be too pessimistic. You never know what's going to happen to us in the winter. But it's not looking good right now. So translating that to Wolford inflow, currently we're about 17 feet from full. We've got about 23,000 acre feet remaining to fill. That's actually pretty close to average when you include the really dry years. Typical for non-substitution years is more like 10 feet below full. But we have gone down to close to 50 feet from full in like 2003. So it could be worse, but we are coming from a bit more of a deficit than in normal years. So this is our January 1st official forecast. So really early look at what we can expect to flow into Wolford this year in the April through July period. And I just want to point out with the 90% exceedance forecast volume, that's a volume of about 14,000 acre feet, and we will not fill. You know, if you just compare that number to what we have left to fill, somewhere in that 70 to 90% exceedance range, we won't fill the reservoir this year. And to clarify for those who don't look at these all the time, those forecast numbers, so for example, the 10% exceedance forecast means that when they put together their ensemble, the forecast, only 10% of their forecasts exceed that far. So the 90% means that almost all of their forecasts were for more water than that 14.3 thousand acre foot number. But when you look at last year, thanks to our largely our dry spring, we came in at 30,000 acre feet, so only 57% of average. Comparing that to this year's forecast, that's between our 50 and 70% exceedance range. When you look at last year compared to last year's January 1st, 90 and 70% exceedance forecasts, we were right in between those two. So basically that is to say, falling in between that range in the 70 to 90% exceedance forecast is not unlikely. 2025, we did have a very dry spring. And so that is sort of what tanked forecasts. But this year, with how low things are now, how dry things have been, it's not unlikely that we'll be seeing something close to our lower range forecasts. So those 14.3 and 26,000 acre foot numbers are not just sort of outliers to ignore, they're real possibilities. Moving to Elkhead, this is the nearest SNOTEL site. The snowpack plot for the nearest SNOTEL site to Elkhead Reservoir. Black line is 2026 to date, and I just included some mostly recent dry years for comparison. And you can see along with many other parts of the basin I've shown, we've set some records this year. We're currently setting record lows for our snowpack. So again, not looking great here either. How it translates in Elkhead, we're about 13 feet down from full pool, which is not atypical. We've got about 8,500 acre feet remaining to fill. Our January 1st official forecast ranged from 22,000 acre feet to 83,000 acre feet. And just comparing this to last year, we ended up with 34,000 acre feet, just under half of average. Should be noted that that was only 1,000 acre feet above the 90% exceedance forecast. I again think that the lower end of this range is what's more realistic for this year, given the precipitation we've seen. But again, at least at Elkhead, 22,000 acre feet, even if we get close to that 90% exceedance volume, that's still well more than we need to fill. So not as dire at Elkhead, just because it's a pretty small bucket on a big tributary.
Thank you, Sam. So looking at the larger Colorado River Basin, just a reiteration of what Sam showed, but at the basin at large. So we, this disconnect between precipitation and snow, right? We're just seeing higher temperatures. So precipitation in October, it was really high, but that fell as rain, not as snow. So you see it in the precipitation plot. And that's part of the reason why we're close to median. It's just we had such a boost in October. Snow, as we can see, it is not great at all. We're, Gerald. In terms of the reservoirs, I just wanted to highlight, this has actually gotten worse. So this is showing what this highlighted red box is showing, the unregulated inflows into these reservoirs, November, what they thought was going to happen in November compared to what they thought was going to happen in December. I'm just going to highlight Powell. Inflows into Powell fell by 1 million acre feet from November to December, and now they fell another 500,000 acre feet. So as of end of last week, 24-month study shows 6.5 million acre feet going into Lake Powell under the most probable scenario. And so I added this. I know it's a chart, and guys sometimes don't like charts, but I just wanted to put in context of what what the range of inflows into Powell for this year are compared to the past, right? So last year, 2025, you can see it, I highlighted in the red box. 2025 was not a good year. We had under 5 million acre feet of unregulated inflows into Powell. And so the red, green, and blue columns at the end show the range we're expecting for this year. And this wasn't updated according to the 24-month study that came out a couple of days ago. So, so this is, the range is looking actually worse in a way and better in another way. So here on the top left, sorry, you can see the range of the water year 2026. So the minimum probable is at 4.24, most probable 7, right? This was in last month's 24-month study. So as of last week, the most probable is now at 6.5% million acre feet. Minimum probable, interestingly, went up from 4.2 to 4.7. I have sent that inquiry to the Bureau of Reclamation. I don't understand why. I don't know how they're predicting a better minimum probable. And so know that because of the dry hydrology and the critical conditions we're seeing on Lake Powell, two document agreements have been triggered. The drought response operations agreement was triggered in July. That document tries to protect Powell at 3525. Additionally, the supplemental EIS was triggered in the fall, and the EIS protects 3,500. DROA protects 3,525 by mainly two actions, right? DROA, the first action under DROA is to change the release pattern out of Powell to keep water in Powell right now. And I'll show you on the next slide, actually. And then you increase releases in the spring when you're hoping for higher inflows into Powell so that you just keep the elevation there. And you'll see this illustration a little bit better. If that change in operations is not enough to keep elevations at 3525, what DROA looks into is releases from the initial CRISP units. And that hasn't been decided yet, but it looks very likely that that is going to have to be done this year to keep Powell above 3525.
And
Supplementally, yes, go ahead.
just a real quick, my guess as to why the December or the January 24-month study went up by 500,000 acre feet on the lowest probable analysis is the DROA releases. They may be anticipating, although they haven't made that decision yet, they may be anticipating 500,000 acre feet out of Flaming Gorge going into Powell, and therefore boosting that minimum probable number up by 500,000 acre feet.
Could be, they don't do it to the other ones, but who knows?
I know,
It could
but
be.
I just.
Good thought. Under the supplemental EIS, the additional action that could be taken to protect elevation 3,500 is reduction of releases out of Powell. It could be reduced to 6 million acre feet, not below 6. Right now, it's at 7.48 for this year. So this is a potential, could help, could not help, but this shows you the amount of water you're retaining in Powell this winter and early spring, and you're compensating, you're making those exact same additional releases later on in the year. So the total amount of water you're releasing out of Powell is not changing. You're still releasing 7.48 total in this water year, but you're holding water up, holding more water in Powell right now, and you'll just increase releases later on when we're hoping to see high spring inflows into Powell. And that you can see in the 24-month study actually here, where I circled around, we're hovering over 3525 until June because of this change in release pattern from DROA. So we're keeping the reservoir at 3525 under the minimum probable it tanks right after that, hitting all of the critical elevations, right? We drop below 3525, that is the DROA elevation. We drop below 3500, which is the supplemental EIS, and we drop below power pool. But this graph looks better than it did a month ago because of this additional 500,000 acre feet of water in the minimum probable. So before we were staying at minimum power, we didn't have this bump back, that's showing here. So I want to emphasize one thing as well, speaks to the draft EIS point we made earlier. So the release out of Powell, planned release out of Powell for 2026 is 7.48. It could drop to 6 if Powell's gonna drop to protect the elevation of 3,500. If the release out of Powell reduces below 7 million acre feet, the 10-year running average is likely gonna fall below 82.5. So know that that could happen if conditions continue to look bad, dry. And lastly, this is the 24-month study for Mead. Things have not changed much. Releases are set to 7.7 million acre feet for this year. And they have looked like this for the last couple months, which is somewhat low compared to history. But that's because of conservation, voluntary, not, that's, and not involuntary that is happening there. And that is that. Questions.
Well, thanks. That's much more upbeat than the last presentation.
Oh, yeah.
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 Yeah, we're all happy now.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Both of you, appreciate it. And I recognize why they had surprised looks on their face. I skipped right over Shoshone permanency, and that's why Raquel thought she was done speaking for a little while. I'll be pretty quick on Shoshone, although it is of critical importance to the district. We'll just say publicly, we provided correspondence to the board after our amazing outcome at the CWCB meeting in late November, getting an 8-0 decision to accept our offer to add the Shoshone water rights to the in-stream flow. It was a contested hearing requested by the four Front Range providers who opposed it. The CWCB found it within themselves to unanimously accept our offer. We did modify the in-stream flow agreement in real time during the final portion of that hearing and that deliberation by the board. We believe it came out very well for the West Slope, and really appreciated the work done. First of all, let me say our main STEM board members all showed up. Our president of the board showed up, and none of them got to speak. And yet their presence in that room mattered tremendously. And I just want to point out that not only were they there, but elected officials from most of our constituent entities who are contributing money also showed up. Many of whom did get to speak. The rules changed in real time, but was really, really remarkable. In addition to our elected officials from our entities that have pledged money, and the counties who were present, the Speaker of the House, State House, was there and gave a very eloquent explanation to the CWCB as to why they had no choice but to vote for it. She convinced me anyway, and apparently convinced the board. It was really well done. My hats off to the directors for showing up, to all of our partners for being there. I want to say, you know, Orla, who is here, was there present and was very supportive and participated, our partner agencies and organizations participated in real-time negotiation, and it was remarkable, a remarkable sign of cooperation when you have 20 lawyers in a room caucusing, and they're all in agreement and represent a variety of different interests on the river. It was really impressive to see that. And I think it was conveyed to the CWCB board just how collaborative this process has been. I have to stress that the only reason Peter and I were as prepared as we were and were able to present the district's case was the work of everybody on staff who has put in the work. There's no way that either Peter or I would be able to do that without the support of everybody on the staff. And the staff did a tremendous job getting ready for that hearing and getting us ready for water court, where we sit today. In just a few days, at the end of this month, we'll find out who is opposing us and who's filing a statement of opposition and support, that Orwellian term that only makes sense in Colorado water courts. But we're gonna move that case forward, hopefully quickly. Just want to say the only other party I forgot to thank here today is the CWCB staff, from the leadership from Lauren Riss right on down through their in-stream flow unit, along with the CPW, were instrumental in actually getting the result that we needed. That kind of cooperation is something we don't see very often between local, regional, and state governments, and it was there in spades, and it was really great to see that. I think folks at the federal level might take a note as to how to get things done, frankly, but Peter?
I would just add that, you know, it was readily apparent that over the course of our presentations, you know, ranging from formal introduction of Shoshone back in May through the September hearing, the November hearing, CWCB board itself also clearly invested a lot of time in trying to, you know, get to a better understanding of what the issues were and how to try to, you know, get themselves comfortable with it. So they deserve some kudos as well.
They do. And it's great outcome, really fun to celebrate a win, and on to the next one. You know, it's gonna be a hard fought battle at water court. Again, engaging with all of our supporters as well as our opponents, and our staff is gonna be working extremely hard on that. So that, I'll just stop there. We'll move on to our Gunnison Basin Roundtable appointment. We do need a motion to appoint Caleb Foy as our district's representative to the roundtable, because we do not have an employee who lives within the boundaries of the Gunnison Basin. The Gunnison Basin Roundtable has decided that they interpret the state law to say that we cannot have a voting member, but nonetheless, Caleb will be so persuasive that he doesn't need to vote. He'll just convince everybody to vote the way he would have voted. But Caleb is back over here. He's getting his feet solidly on the ground in the Gunnison Basin. And really appreciate it. So it's a motion to appoint him as our representative.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Rover, second by Chavez.
Hazard.
Why is it a non-voting seat?
That's the interpretation by the roundtable.
Is that even on the other basins too?
That's the interpretation, I think. Well, in the main stem, we actually live here, so our employees, most of them live here, so they can vote. We have a voting member in the Southwest Basin Roundtable, and their roundtable is fine with the interpretation of the statute that allows them to vote. And
that's what I thought.
I think, vote at the Yampa as well.
Yeah,
So
that's what I was pretty sure of, because it's been that way since I've been on there since 08.
take it up with the Gunnison Basin Roundtable and their interpretation.
Just don't get the AG involved.
They did. That's the.
did.
Yeah.
Okay.
That is your answer, but I was trying to be polite about it. Yeah. Okay. So we have a motion. Sorry.
Motion, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passed.
Congratulations.
Gunnison Basin.
All right. Next up is the approval of the USGS joint funding agreement, and we have Rebecca Breezemore and Michelle Flinker, who can just take a seat at the table here. This is an important program. This is one that many of you, I think, probably had the same experience I did when I got on the board back in 2006. It raises your eyebrows to see huge numbers associated with gauging and monitoring of rivers, especially when we're paying the federal government. But I'll let these two very talented and very intelligent people explain to you why we should be doing this. So.
Thanks, Andy, and I'll keep it fairly brief today, but I think as most of you know, we hold a very large joint funding agreement with the USGS to maintain and fund maintenance and operation of both stream gauges and water quality gauges throughout the west slope of Colorado. This is just a snapshot of some of those gauges to get you an idea of where they are. The program funds 22 stream gauge sites, 54 water quality and monitoring sites, 5 water temperature stations, and then 1 precipitation gauge, which was put in post Grizzly Creek fire. That program for 2026, when this slide comes up, for 2026, that program cost is anticipated to be $1.06 million. That is a large line item of our budget, of course, but there's more complications to that. That's not what we pay. So to break that down a little bit, there is cooperative matching funds from the USGS in 2 different forms, in CMF, those cooperating matching funds, and then also in FPS or federal priority stream gauge sites. So there's many stream gauge sites throughout our district that have very long-standing records or are very important for administration, and the USGS puts federal dollars into those. So the CRD program cost is broken down. Our total is $800,015, and then the USGS portion is that $246,000. And then when you further break down our total, we have 2 different programs. We have the general fund program, and then we have the enterprise fund program. So a portion of our total cost goes to fund gauges on Elk Head Reservoir, and then water quality and stream gauges on Wolford Mountain Reservoir, and that's at $186,000. And then the general fund contributes $629,000 to all of the other gauges and water quality sites within our basin. Of that $815,000 total, however, we also receive partner contributions. And there are 2 ways in which we receive these partner contributions. Under that general fund program, you can see that there's $166,000 for this 2026 program that is anticipated to be offset by partner contributions through contracts that we have with partner organizations within the district. And then we'll cover the remaining $463,000 of that cost. And then under the enterprise fund program, we also have costs covered by partners. It's not in a direct way, though. It's not through contracts that say these partners are contributing dollars for the US Gauge program. It's more so through their general contributions towards reservoir operations for Elk Head and Wolford. And so through those agreements, those costs will be offset by $100,000 through our partners, and we will cover $86,000. So to kind of give you a total, the numbers to keep in mind is that our budget line item is $815,000, but after partner contributions, that does come down to $563,000, or a little over 50% of that total $1 million program cost. It's also just important to note this was something that I know the board got a briefing on last year, that we have seen these cost increases go up just based on, as we all know, inflation, cost to do services has increased. And unfortunately, the USGS hasn't gotten they haven't gotten raises in congressional funding for these stream gauge programs in a number of years. And so when we see those inflationary increases, they are unfortunately all falling on stakeholders. The USGS is not able to raise their matching funds to match inflationary increases. So For this year, the River District is seeing a 4% increase to our total JFA cost from 2025. And this chart is essentially just showing how our costs have increased over the years. That blue bar is what the River District has contributed to the program since 2014. And that red and green are the two different matching funds that the USGS has contributed, which of course has remained of this, the same size since 2014. But we were pleased this year that we were seeing a 4% increase instead of, we had a couple years there with pretty large increases of 8% or so. Oh, yeah, and do you want to go? Yeah.
So the concern around stagnation of contribution from the USGS has been brought up by the board in recent years. I had the pleasure of meeting the director of the USGS at CRUA and brought this to his attention, and there's a ball that is moving in the USGS, and maybe we'll see something come from it. Of course, there are no guarantees, but it was exciting that he was interested in this and willing to hear, because our contributions to USGS are pretty significant, right? And they do see it as important. So.
Yep, and the 166,000 is offset by partners. That includes about 9 different entities within the district that we actually bill each year for their contributions. But that does not include all of the partners that are actually contributing throughout the basin. Our USGS program, of course, is partially funded by the USGS. But then we hold a JFA, the USGS, but then many other entities also hold their own individual JFAs and contribute to the same gauges that we are contributing to. So for example, in the Upper Gunnison Water Conservancy District holds a joint funding agreement and is contributing to the same network of gauges that we, as well as many other partners in the Gunnison, are contributing to. In the Yampa Basin, for example, it's a little bit different because we contribute to several gauges and then partners there contribute to different gauges. So they're not shown in our joint funding agreement, but they are still funding their own gauges. So just to give you an idea, these are just all of the entities within our district that are part of our JFA that are contributing to the same gauges that are within our joint funding agreement. It is pretty extensive, of course, with federal partners, with counties and municipalities, water conservancy districts. So it is a very robust, collaborative and cooperative funding program to maintain a lot of water quality and stream gauges across the West. So, so with that, the staff recommendation, this loads. Staff recommendation is for the board to authorize the general manager to enter into a new annual joint funding agreement with the USGS, subject to review and approval by legal counsel in the amount not to exceed $815,000 to support water quality and water quality monitoring activities in 2026, consistent with the adopted 2026 budget, and further recommends that the board authorize the general manager to enter into related reimbursement agreements with cooperating partners, subject to legal review and approval to offset the program costs of our partners' contributions of $166,000. And I'm happy to answer questions or receive comments from the board if you have any as well.
Alden?
I'm a proponent for this, as you know, but USGS, I mean, we're funding a big chunk, the River District is, of this program. But even when they shut down, there's a government shutdown, they go home, nothing gets done. So I don't know if they're still charging us for it. I mean, I doubt they are. They are. Okay, so we're still on the hook for it, even though they went home for how many days last year. And so they're the pros. I trust their data like you can't believe it. But it takes sometimes 3 months to get the results back when you're looking for a constituent from, like, say, post-fire or a flood, whatever you may have going on in your basin, or from drought. The peer review is just, it's over the top, and I understand why it is, but it's almost too much over the top. And I've always thought, is there another alternative? And I ain't come up with one. Because you want to use the pros, so it's supported data, it's defensible, yada, yada, yada. but I'm not coming up with one. But recently as well, there was a conversation said to the state division engineer that the state uses these as well, and I've said it before, to where if there's administration happening near river, these are the gauges that the Division of Water Resources are using, and the DWR, I don't see their name on the list. Or the state of Colorado. And I think it'd be really good if they're gonna be the one dropping the hammer on you, that they're gonna use that for enforcement, that they pay for a portion of that stream, at least the stream gauge, not necessarily the water quality, but the stream gauge. But then even the water quality side, the Colorado Department of Public Health comes in, and you get all these other entities telling you, you can't do that, you know, you got a contaminant in there, you gotta clean up, but yet they're using the data, but they're not supporting the program at all. I don't know if I want some of these people to.
That's what I was wondering.
But at least with the stream gauges, I think there's value to it because the prior appropriations doctrine is so important to what we do. And water quality and quality go together, but I really think somehow the state's they gotta kick in some cash. $100,000 would go a long ways. And I would rather see them do 300,000 for as much administration goes on in the Colorado River District that they just get to use just because we're good people.
Thanks.
So I would make a motion to approve this though, by the way, as well.
I'd second that.
Say move it, say move.
We got, been moved.
I made the motion.
Moved and seconded. Sorry about that. It was my
Seconded by
fault.
Director Mason.
Mason. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passed.
I was just making a recommendation to President Catlin that we take the remaining items in the general manager's report and move them to item 13.5 in the morning, and not address them now. We have dinner tonight at Hugo's Restaurant. The address is on your agenda at 1605 Grand Avenue. If you go south on Grand Avenue, which is 82, as if they're going to Carbondale, within the city limits of Glenwood, so you're not leaving the city. It's 1605 to 16th and Grand. You will pass City Market and Walgreens on your left, the high school on your right, turn right immediately after the high school, and Hugo's is in this beautiful shopping center there. It's in a strip mall, right across from the high school. It's actually a very nice restaurant. We will see you all there at 6. I do want to indicate Shannon Wattis, who is the new executive director of the Colorado Mesa University Water Center, is going to join us for dinner, and will actually speak to you tomorrow very briefly at the end of the general manager's report. But you all might remember that you voted to fund the water center of $300,000. A lot of that's going to go to her, pay her salary. So feel free to ask her questions and talk to her at dinner. She's not buying you drinks. Anyway, thank you. And tomorrow morning we start information and outreach. Those of you who are on the committee, you receive your committee assignments. We have a 7:30 in the morning meeting right here. Breakfast will be here 7:30 a.m. For you rancher types, it should be no problem, Francie. Information outreach is then the general meeting starts at 8:30 in the morning. We should try to get you guys out of here by no later than 1 o'clock tomorrow, but that's largely dependent upon you.
When are they really gonna?